This is a production of Cornell University.
I want to welcome you all today to our annual conference. The Center for Teaching Excellence puts on this conference every year. Our guest today, Eric Mazur, is one of the high points of the week. I'm going to not talk very long at all. You can come here to hear me talk. Today we have Dr. Eric Mazur. He is the Balkanski Professor of Physics and Applied Physics at Harvard University. He is an accomplished physicist, of which I'm completely incompetent to judge. But he also manages to be an educational pioneer, an innovator, and is especially good at, well, you'll find out what he's especially good at. But what I like is his ability to innovate in the classroom, but in ways that are scientifically sound and contribute to the research and that are reproducible widely. Today he's going to give a presentation about some of his work. Turning Lectures into Learning is the title. Learning Catalytics will allow you to all participate. We'll hopefully have time for questions at the end.
Absolutely.
I'll just turn it over to Eric. Thank you.
Okay, great. Oops, this is off. Thank you. Is this on or not? No, it's not on, and I need it. Test. Good. Thank you so much, Rob, for the opportunity to return here. It's, I think, the third or fourth time that I'm talking about interactive teaching, but the first time that I'm using technology, which, you know, is a little bit of a danger because once you start using technology, people focus on the technology rather on the pedagogy, and I don't want to give the wrong impression. This talk is about pedagogy. If you're a Twitterer, that's my Twitter handle. And I see here that Raymond Chang, where are you? Sending me a message, hello. Already distracted by technology. Anyway, we live in an interesting time. I think both exciting and exhilarating, but also frightening time, because we come from an era where information and the knowledge embedded in information was mostly static, evolving very slowly, curated by libraries and universities, with access to information was only limited to where there was access to things like books and so on, to an era where information is a rapidly evolving body of knowledge and one that is accessible around the clock and everywhere. It's clearly changing the role of education, and I think very few of us can even imagine what education will look like 10 or 20 years from now. It's already changed, but it's going to change in many more dramatic ways. Since this is a talk about education, about pedagogy, I would like to start with a little exercise because I don't think we can start talking about teaching before we've thought about learning. I mean, there are many centers for teaching, but I really think we should put more emphasis on the learning. And I want to start with a little exercise to make you reflect on your own education. So I want you to write down in a few words, whoops, and I just realized that I forgot to include the question. Did I actually add it here or not? No, I forgot to include it in my session. But we'll do it by low-tech means. I want you to take a little piece of paper, or if you have a device in front of you, you can use that. And I want you to write down something you're good at. Something you know you do well, something you're proud of. You know, and when you do something well, you know that other people respect you for that, you enjoy it. It could be baking cakes, it could be solving partial differential equations, it could be interpreting medieval works of art. Doesn't matter what it is, I want you to pick one thing, and ideally, I want that one thing to be something that has been important in your career. So take a moment to think about that and then enter it. I'm going to actually quickly, while you do that, I'm going to stop the session, which is going to, well, do I really want to do that? No, we're going to use a low-tech means of doing this. Okay, so write it down. Anybody need more time? If you need more time, you're in trouble. You're all successful individuals, so it shouldn't take that long. Okay, now that you've written it down, fold it up. Nobody is allowed to see. It's completely personal information. I will not retrieve that information from you in any fashion. I just did this to set you up for the next question, which is the hard question. How is it that you became good at whatever it is that you wrote down? And I'd meant you to input it in Learning Catalytics, but I forgot to program the question. I guess I'm jet-lagged here. I've been flying around too much. So we'll do it on paper again. Write down in a few words how you became good at whatever it is that you wrote down. I can at once see from the faces that a lot of people are thinking, you know, and this reaction is universal because the thing that we're good at, we learn sort of automatically. We're unaware of how we learn them. So write down in a few words, what were the circumstances? Where did you learn whatever it is that you wrote down on that little piece of paper? Now, I have done this little exercise all around the world. Done it in Latin America, all over the US, all over Europe, all over Asia, all over Africa. Well, not all over Africa because I haven't spoken in that many countries there, but in quite a few. The Middle East. And I've collected the responses to the second question. Unfortunately, I forgot to do it here, so I won't be able to collect your responses. But it's very interesting. Because there are no, and right now I have tens of thousands of data points. I should actually write a paper about it. But there are no cultural differences. People report the same thing all around the world, which is not that surprising because we're all human beings. We're wired to learn the same way. So, did everybody write down something? Yes? How many of you wrote down lecture? Raise your hand if you wrote down lecture. Nobody. Well, you see, if I use the system, there's usually one or two people who enter the lecture, but I guess that whoever wrote down lecture here was too shy to write it down. And how do we teach? This is how we teach. Look at this learning space that we have right here. I'm actually talking in a space like that. This is a picture of me teaching my physics for pre-medical students at Harvard. It's a very old picture. It was taken BC, before computers. You see, I was using an overhead projector there, right? So we see right off the bat, that we have a problem, right? You probably wrote down something that comes pretty close to the word practice. In fact, whenever I do this exercise and we create a word cloud from all of the responses, the word practice is huge. And all of the other words disappear, and the word lecture or class typically does not appear at all. We need to practice, to do, in order to learn. Let me take you in 3 slides through the history of the architecture of learning spaces. It started with the Greek 3,000 years ago. The Greek developed the amphitheater not as a learning space. It was for performances, to focus specifically the attention of many onto one performer or a group of performers. Then, unfortunately, somewhere around the Renaissance or so, the amphitheater got adopted for teaching. Here we're in the 18th century, and here we're in the 21st century. This is actually the class at Harvard where I teach my pre-med class. So here's what I would like to do today. I would like to talk a little about the lecture. Those of you who know my work know I've been bashing the lecture for 20 years. I'll add one more time to that. We already started out by pointing out something rather interesting, that the important skills in our life we do not learn in a lecture. But I'll continue to reflect a little bit more on lecture and about what we mean by educating people. Then I want to talk briefly about peer instruction, which is a method to teaching that I developed that can be used in a setting like this, which is not very conducive to learning, and about 20 years ago. And I did that in response to discovering that my students weren't learning anything. In spite of getting high evaluations at the end of the term, My students did not even understand the most basic concept in physics, force. That was a disheartening discovery, and that led me to change my approach, so I'll talk about that briefly. Then, I'd like to talk to you about peer instruction 2.0, namely the new approach to peer instruction that uses learning catalytics, and we'll have some fun with different types of activities. So let's start by talking about the lecture. Given that this is the predominant mode of teaching that is used all around the globe, there are no cultural differences there either. You go to Korea, you find the same type of classrooms as we have here. We might well ask ourselves the question, what is it that is actually happening in a lecture? Let's go back to that picture of me teaching my pre-med class. I would like you to describe the process on the screen behind me here with one or two words, and ideally I want one of those two words to be a verb. And there are two verbs I do not want to hear, teaching or learning. So go ahead, the floor is yours. Come on, this is not that hard. There's no trick question. Watching. Telling. Listening. Sitting or sleeping? What did you say? These are my students. They're not sleeping. But actually it's interesting that somebody mentioned sleeping. I'll get back to sleeping at the end of my presentation here today. But recently I came across a marvelous quote. Some people talk in their sleep. Lecturers talk while other people are sleeping. But these are my students, they're not sleeping. Notice that most of the verbs that we've heard, oops, pardon me, that's not the slide I wanted to show, deal with either me or my students, right? I want to gather the whole thing, the whole process. What is the process that is happening here? And I may have seeded your imagination with that slide. Transmission. Transmission of what? Information. Some people will say transmission of knowledge, but I don't know what knowledge is. I can only transmit information. The knowledge is something that needs to be created. Yes, let's put it a little bit down so I can stand here because I feel disconnected from the audience. So knowledge is something that needs to be constructed in the heads of the students. And you know what? My students had actually pointed this out early in my career. See, when I started teaching, I did not ask myself the question, how am I going to teach? Which is kind of strange, right? Because the first thing you should ask yourself when you're doing something new is, how am I going to do it? To me, it was patently clear how I was going to teach. I was going to do to my students what my professors had done to me. I naively believed this is how I learned, this is how people learn. So I started teaching, and to make matters worse, I very quickly got feedback that I was doing the right thing. Students did well on what I considered difficult examinations. They gave me high evaluations, so all seemed well. What was the question that did come up in my mind when I was told that I was going to teach the physics for pre-med course? Put yourself in my position. What do you think that was? Not how, but what exactly, or more precisely, what book? So I went to a colleague who had taught the course before, and he told me, oh, in this course we have used Halliday and Resnick. Those of you who have taken a science course may know it's been a classic for I don't know how many years. It's still being used. Now, I was educated in Europe, where typically we don't buy, as students, you don't buy a book for an introductory physics, for an introductory course. Why buy the book if the professor is presenting the content to you? But I was told that I had to make sure that the bookstore had enough copies of Halliday and Resnick because all the students would buy books. So I went to the bookstore, I said, be sure to have 120 copies of Halliday and Resnick by September. And as I walked back to my office, I thought, wait a minute, if the students have the book, and I have the book, then what do I do in the classroom? So I stopped at a colleague's office and I asked him this question, and he said, oh, don't worry, there are lots of different physics textbooks. And he showed a shelf full, and very quickly I found the perfect book. It was perfect for two reasons. One, it had a different approach. But that was not the important reason. The important reason was the book was out of print. Students couldn't get their hands on the book. So I used that book to prepare my lecture notes, and in class I would either project the lecture notes on the overhead projector or I would write the notes on the board. And because my approach was different from the textbook, I handed out to my students at the end of the class a copy of my lecture notes. You know what the unexpected result was? The unexpected result was that about half a dozen students wrote that very first year on their questionnaire, on their student evaluation, Professor Mazur is lecturing straight from his lecture notes. Hello? I mean, what was I supposed to do? Develop another set of lecture notes to lecture from that was different from the lecture notes I handed out to them? Yeah, I was furious. These ungrateful students. But you know, I was focusing on information transfer. And had the students read the book, they would have seen that the book wasn't that different from what I presented in class. So given that education all around the globe focuses mostly on the transfer of information, we could ask ourselves the rather logical question, is that what education is? Is education just the transfer of information? I could poll you with learning catalytics, but I'm not going to do it. So here's what I want you to do. If you believe that education is just the transfer of information, you put one finger on your chest like this, right? If you think education is more than the transfer of information, you put two fingers on your chest. If you do not put your fingers on your chest, I will come to you and take this little microphone off, and you'll have to tell everybody what you think, okay? So everybody understands the instructions? So 1, yes, education is just the transfer of information. 2, it's more than transfer of information. So get ready. At the count of 3, hand on the chest. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Raise your hand so that everybody can see, because it's pretty unanimous. I see 1, 1. 1, 1. Only one so far. You're the only one. Okay. Okay. Now, if you chose 1, you're in trouble. You're going to lose your job very quickly. Because let's imagine that education is just the transfer of information. What would be the logical thing to do? What would be the logical thing to do? Think about it pragmatically. The book, or now that we're in the information age, what will we do? We go the route of massive online courses. We tape the best possible professor doing this field and that field, different languages, right? And you put it online. What would you lose by doing that? What would you lose by replacing lectures by simply having students watch the lecture online? Interaction. Interaction! But how much interaction is there in a real classroom? I'm sure you've seen these video clips of, a professor lecturing and stopping, saying, "Does anybody have any questions? Anybody?" And the students look down. They don't want to make eye contact, right? There's very little interaction in real class. I'm working really hard to interact with you, and you're doing a good job resisting. But I'm going to get you. But I'm going to continue to try, okay? So I think in a real class, there's very little interaction. Maybe in small classes. In large ones, it's impossible. What would you gain? You'd actually gain a lot. Have you ever had, in your classes, a student raise his hand and say, "Professor, can you please be quiet for 5 minutes? I need to think." It's never happened to me. But if you're online, you can hit the pause button and think. Or if you read a book, you can do the same thing. You can put the book down and say, I've got to think about that. Or have you ever had a student who raised her hand and said, "Professor, could you please repeat the last 10 minutes? I need to hear it again." No. Online, you can do that. Or you can pause the tape and call up a friend and say, "Hey, do you understand what Professor Mazur says at 8 minutes and 21 seconds? So there are a lot of things you could do that you cannot do, all involving thinking. I'm going to show you some incredibly exciting data at the end of my presentation today from MIT that come back to sleeping there too, that shows brain activity during a lecture. And what you can see is that in a lecture, there's just no time to think, because your mind is held captive by the stream of information. If you start to think now and daydream, you cannot listen to what I'm saying at the same time. So basically, the activity that most students revert to when they're in a lecture is note-taking. And instead of getting the information in their brains, it gets in the paper. Anyway, enough picking on the one or two people who selected lecture here. Let's now pick on the rest. Because most of you said education is more than just a transfer of information. Now I want you to tell me what that is. What is it?
Students need to understand.
Understanding. But understanding is such a vague word. I don't even know exactly how to quantify, assess it, and so on. So let's find problem solving. Let's hear a few more things here.
New thinking ways.
New ways of thinking.
Transferring key points.
Transferring key points. Transferring to what?
Key points of more than existing knowledge.
Okay.
Application.
Application. Questioning. Now, what did most of you write down in a little exercise that we did at the beginning? Practicing, exactly. Practicing. As a learner, you see, you need to do something with that information. It's not just taking the information, opening your skull, putting it in your brain, closing your skull, right? You have to actually understand what that information means. You have to assimilate the information. I think Piaget would have called it accommodated, but I'm using the word assimilate here. You have to connect it to any pre-existing knowledge in your head. You have to connect it to your experiences. However, if you stop to think about it, so much of education is simply the instructor delivering information to the students, then you wait a few months or a month, and on the exam you have the students verbatim reproduce the information back to the instructor. I mean, I was educated in Europe. You know, we pride ourselves in good education in Europe. I had history. I had 6 different languages in high school. Let's take history, Dutch history, because I'm Dutch, right? In 1660-something, the Dutch defeated the British in the River Thames. And then on the exam, a month later, in what year did the Dutch defeat the British in the River Thames? I must have remembered it because I ended up getting my exam that admitted to university, but I've forgotten what the date is. Do I know what the events were that led up to this defeat? Why the Dutch were able to defeat the British right outside London in their own home turf? No. But so much of education is just the regurgitation of facts by the instructors and then back from the students, even with problem solving. I was not that long ago at the University South of Boston, I won't mention which one. I was giving a talk in the physics department, and after my lecture, one of the professors came to me and said, I had something really weird this year in my class. He had tried very hard to motivate his students by putting physics in a real-world context. And the real-world context he had used was baseball. There's a lot of physics in baseball, right? Runners running, trajectories of baseballs, collisions between balls and bat. So in class, he would use examples from baseball. On homework, it would be baseball problems. On the midterm examinations, it'd be baseball problems. And then at the end of the semester, when he was preparing the final exam, he realized he'd run out of baseball problems. So he put some football problems on the exam. Professor, complained to students, we've never done any football problems. You're laughing about it. But I think the true hallmark of understanding is being able to transfer your knowledge to a new context. In fact, I would argue that unless you're able to take what you've learned in one context and apply it in a new context, with the emphasis on the word new, you have not really learned. However, a lot of assessment does not ever test that. A lot of teaching, and therefore learning, never really prepares the students for that. Well, we need to prepare them for their future career. You know, in the previous century, robots started to replace assembly line jobs. In this century, computers will replace any job that does information retrieval or that does procedural problem solving, because computers can do procedural problem solving. Computers deal very poorly with new problems, but very well with old problems. So I think we really have a duty to prepare our students for that. And unless we change our approach to teaching, that's never going to happen. Anyway, what's the result? Normally when I give a talk about education, I show data. I'm a physicist. I know I cannot convince any other physicist without showing data. However, I want to get to PI 2.0, so I cannot show you data. But if you're interested in the data, I'm just going to give you a highlight, then go to YouTube and watch my talk, Confessions of a Converted Lecturer, and you'll actually see the rather disheartening data that I obtained in my class, namely, no learning. Yes, they were able to do the textbook problem, but they had no understanding of the most basic concept in physics. And the data are in that talk. I won't show them here. And people have shown in many other fields similar lack of learning. Lack of retention. Not only lack of retention of students in the discipline, also lack of retention of what is learned. A study at Carnegie Mellon found that non-majors in physics were back to where they were at the beginning of their introductory physics sequence just 2 months after ending the course. Their level of understanding is simply back all the way to where they were when they began. Well, if that's the case, we should have listened to Father Guido Sarducci 30 years ago, when on Saturday Night Live he unveiled plans for the 5-minute university. Teach in 5 minutes what the average college graduate remembers 5 years after graduating from college. Why waste time teaching all the things that people forget? Well, you're laughing, but I think there's quite a bit of deep truth, and we should all really be crying about it. The famous psychologist Skinner once said, "Education is what is left after all that is learned is forgotten." And there's a deep truth in that. Unfortunately, in many cases, there's very little left, so it's a problem. Okay, so when I discovered that my students weren't learning, I said to myself, let's look at this, right? Education is, in a sense, a two-step process. One, transfer of information. Yeah, you need transfer of information, right? Without transfer of information, there's just no way you can even begin to educate. But we need more. We need students to assimilate that information. Something we cannot do for them. I've often asked myself this question. Where did the assimilation take place for me, for you? Where did it take place? Where did the, now I get it, moment occur? Did it occur in the classroom while you were listening to your professors? I see many people shake their heads. No, maybe on occasion, but mostly not, precisely because there's no time to think. It happened outside of the classroom. Maybe even when you were completely alone, isolated from other students, from the professor, and so on. So, in the standard approach to teaching, that step one takes place in class. Step two takes mostly place out of class. If we ask ourselves, which of those two steps is the hard part, I think we would all agree it's step two, not step one. Right? So we should really focus on that second step. And rather than letting students do that on their own, why not do the following? Let's take these two steps and flip it. We do the first step out of class, the transfer of information, so that we as professors can help our students with the assimilation of the information. Now, there's a lot of focus right now on step one with the massive online, open online courses. Khan Academy, this, that, and the other. To me, that step number one is a trivial one. A lot of people are really excited about these massive open online courses, but to me, it is simply old wine into new bottles. It's taking a lecture, which is not very effective, putting it online was just as ineffective. I mean, it might be good at getting information across, but the actual learning will not occur any better online, depending a little bit on the environment in which it's delivered, than in the classroom. So I want to really focus on that second step. What do you do in the class if you have moved the information transfer out of class? So I now ask my students, before they come to class, I should have done this with you too, I should have told you, watch my Confessions of a Converted Lecturer, and then we'll do some real work in class. We'll try to do the two, which is not the best approach. But I ask my students to either watch a lecture I've given before online, or to read a chapter in the textbook. And then in class, what I do is I teach by questioning rather than by telling. Nothing new. Socrates, 2,000 years ago, already said, we should teach by questioning. Confucius said, that we should learn from each other. Whenever there are three people together, there's bound to be one who can teach the others. He is the actual inventor of pre-instruction, not me. So what I do is, I talk a few minutes, I ask a question. Then I ask my students to think about that question. Silence. They think about it. How often can you actually really think in a classroom? Very little, because there's this constant source that demands your attention, the professor in front of the class. Then I polled them. Initially, I did it with a show of hands, like I just did, hand on the chest. Then the clicker got developed in response to my book being published and the method becoming interesting. And then actually something really annoying happened. The technology got disconnected from the pedagogy, and many instructors adopted the clicker without really thinking about the pedagogy as I'm going to explain it, right? You'd have a professor lecturing, and then stop and say, which of the following is not a living being? A giraffe, a rock, or a flower? Students press 2. The instructor says, that's good, and goes on. No, what I really wanted to do is that after this poll, I want the students to talk to a neighbor, find a neighbor who has a different answer, and try to convince that neighbor of the answer. First time I did it out of complete despair. I was trying to explain the second law or a problem involving the second law, Newton's second law, to my students. I tried for 10 minutes in 2 different ways, and I could see from their confused faces that they didn't get it. In fact, they were so confused they couldn't even articulate a coherent question. So, since I'd run out of ammunition, I said to them, well, why don't you turn to your neighbor and try to discuss it with each other? And something happened I had never seen before. The entire classroom erupted in chaos. They forgot about me in front of the classroom. But what's more surprising, in just 2 minutes, they figured it out. I mean, I tried unsuccessfully for 10 minutes to explain to them. In 2 minutes, they figure it out. But imagine you have 2 students sitting next to each other, Mary and John. Mary has the right answer because she understands it. John does not. On average, Mary is more likely to convince John than the other way around. But what is more important is this. Mary is more likely to convince John than Professor Mazur in front of the class. Why? Because she has only recently learned it. She still knows what the difficulties are that a beginning learner has. Whereas Professor Mazur learned it such a long time ago, to him it's so clear that he cannot even imagine why somebody doesn't understand it. It's what Steven Pinker calls the curse of knowledge. It's kind of an ironic argument I'm making here, right? Because you tend to think the better you know something, the more qualified you are to teach it. But the problem is, as you know something better and better, it becomes so simple in your mind that you overlook the mental difficulties that a beginning learner has. And we know that from our own experiences. I know that as a student, I would often not even bother asking the professor. I would go to a friend and say, hey, do you understand what Professor such and such said then? I'd try to resolve problems with other students or with myself rather than with the professor. And as a professor, you may know that sometimes you would have, I certainly have that happen in my classes. A student comes to me with a question, and I listen to the question, and I think, what's the problem here? Right? It's so clear. Right? You can't imagine why somebody is struggling with something that to you appears to be totally clear. So in just 2 minutes, they improve their thinking and teach one another. I poll them again, usually with significant increase in the correct answers. I explain, and then the cycle repeats. The learning takes place here in that step, the discussion. Let me show you a little video clip, compressed in time, that shows how that works in my chaotic classes. So we have a rectangular loop that is placed in a uniform magnetic field. Ignore the question, okay? By these arrows. So the question is, what are the magnetic forces on the 4 different sides of this loop? So take a minute to think about this and then enter your answers. So they think for about 2 minutes, silence. I don't want them to talk. Okay, please enter your answers. I can see on my screen the distribution. They don't see it clearly here. So turn to your neighbor and see if you can convince one another of the correct choice. Ah, the aha moment there. Did you see that? Initially we had sort of an even split. And now we have an absolutely overwhelming majority for choice number 2. The bottom of this loop is full. And the second distribution they do see. And it's not unusual to go from a 50-50 distribution to one where 90% of the class has it correct in just a few minutes of talking. Because in essence, the students are teaching one another. Yes?
So you don't tell them what the right answer is?
I don't tell them what the right answer is before they talk to each other. But I do wrap up after they talk to each other. I show the second distribution, and I say the right question is number 2, and I may ask for a volunteer of the students to explain it to others, or I may give the explanation. Yes, there has to be closure, absolutely. And then that cycle repeats until the time is up. Do you want to try it? Actually, let me show you a little bit more of a flow chart, right? So I speak a little bit, then I question, then I poll them. If more than 70% has it correct, there's no need to have them talk to each other, right? Because most of the students will turn to somebody else, they have the same answer, and they'll start talking about something else, right? So they're off task. So in that case, I just wrap up. I explain. The question was, in essence, too easy, right? If it's between 30 and 70%, that's perfect. Because that's when you get big gains, right? So they discuss, I poll them again, I explain, and I repeat. If less than 30% have it correct, well, then they're never going to extricate themselves from their ignorance, so to speak, right? There's not going to be any progress there. In that case, the question was too hard, so I revisit the concept and I question again. Some people, when they see this chart, ask me, can this only be used with questions that have right or wrong answers? The answer is no. Well, initially, if you would have asked me, I would have said yes. I developed for the sciences. But I've noticed that many people in art history, humanities, and so on are using the method too. Because anything that involves modeling or interpretation, the sciences involve a lot of modeling, right? Mental modeling of physical models. But in the humanities and art, you have interpretation. And there are 2 ways of teaching the humanities. One is by saying, I'm the expert, here's my interpretation, believe it and accept it and memorize it. The other is to make the students part of the interpretation, to have them try out their interpretation and have a discussion about this interpretation. So in that case, there might not be right and wrong, but this is still a fantastic tool to stimulate discussion about the interpretation. I teach a course on ethics at Harvard. And in ethics, on the extremes, you have right and wrong, but in the middle, there's a huge gray area where you could take experts and they could talk forever and never agree. I use peer instruction for that ethics course to stimulate discussion, much the same way I do it in a science course. So the ideal pathway, if there are right or wrong answer, of course, is the central one. You want to try it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Did you all read that? I had asked Rob to hand out a one-pager about thermal expansion. No? I'm just kidding. Sorry, Rob. But you know what that means. That means I will have to lecture you about thermal expansion because I'm going to ask you a question about thermal expansion. So here we go. Thermal expansion, which means that a solid material expands as it gets hotter, which is very pronounced for metal, is a very important phenomenon. For example, that picture here behind me of a railroad in India shows the effect of the thermal expansion of rails that have been incorrectly laid down. You may have been in a train and heard that at low speed you hear this clickety-clack sound of the wheels. Well, the reason is that the different sections of the rails have a little gap between them. That gap must be there because if it's not there, the rail, when it expands in hotter weather, will buckle, as you see here. In fact, during the Olympics last summer in London, they had particularly hot weather. They had to shut down the high-speed railway for a few hours because the high-speed railway have very small gaps. In North European weather, that doesn't matter that much because the fluctuations in temperature are not that big, but they were actually bigger than they had expected, and there was buckling of the rails going on. Steel beam building, same thing. Well, the reason thermal expansion takes place is because metals, like all other materials, are made out of atoms. And atoms get further away from one another when the material gets hotter. So this is a cold metal, and this is a hot metal. Cold, hot. That's all there is to it. That's what I'm going to be testing you on. Not just those 9 atoms. All of them, right? All of the millions of billions of atoms in the material. Now you may be wondering, why is it that atoms get further away from one another? I'm not going to test you on this, so don't worry, but I'll tell you just to satisfy your curiosity. Atoms don't sit still, they move, which is called thermal motion. And the amplitude of that thermal motion is what we call temperature. So when you feel something that's hot, the atoms are actually shaking more than for something that's cold. Right? So this is a cold atom, this is a hot atom. Now if you vibrate over a bigger distance, you need more space. Right? So they just push each other aside because they need more space because of the thermal motion. Questions, anybody? Cold and hot. You better ask questions because, look, one of the things I could do is I could blank the screen and then put up a question that says, when metals get hotter, they expand because A, the atoms get closer together, B, the atoms stay the same distance, C, they get further apart. But that would not be very interesting, right? Because I would be giving information to you, you'd be giving that same information back to me. So I'm going to take this concept of atoms getting further away from one another, like this, to a new context to see if you've actually understood it. Cold, hot. No questions at all. I knew I was a good lecturer. I guess I just give brilliantly clear lectures. No questions? Yes.
So what happens if you constrain them and they can't move?
So the question is, what happens if you constrain them and they can't move? In a sense, that's what is happening to that rail, right? The rail wants to expand, but it can't, so it buckles. You cannot prevent the atoms from getting further apart. They will just get further apart. The forces involved are enormous. Okay? So, unfortunately, you cannot constrain them. That's the answer to your question. Anybody else? Yeah, good. Now we're getting questions.
How come when it cools down, they don't go back to where they should be?
Oh, how come they don't get back to where they should be when it cools down? They do. So this is hot, this is cold. Once you have them hot and you make it cold again, they come back where they were. Right? So if a rail buckles when it's hot, as the temperature goes down at night, it unbuckles and it'll be straight again. Absolutely. But imagine you have a building with steam beams, and in a hot day it expands and the plaster starts to crumble because it doesn't expand as much as the metal. Then you have a problem. The metal will come back, but the plaster will still be cracked. So in engineering, it's a big problem.
How do you predict which material
How do you predict which materials will expand more than another? So people have done measurements and taken gold and see how much gold expands when you raise its temperature by 10 degrees and how much silver. And so each material has a coefficient of expansion. And there are ways of actually predicting what the coefficients of expansion. You're way behind what I'm going to ask. You're way behind. I'm just going to ask about expansion. But yeah, you can predict it using theories that are way beyond the scope of my little lecture here. Okay, are we ready? Okay, so here's the question. Consider a rectangular metal plate with a circular hole in it. And no talking to your neighbor, right? If you talk to your neighbor, I'm going to pounce on you, okay? I want you all, if you have a device, you enter it in the device. If you don't have a device, you write it down on a little piece. What? Several people have already answered. Think before you answer, okay? I haven't even asked the question. Well, no, it's on your device. Okay, whoops, sorry. When the plate is uniformly heated, the diameter of the hole, 1, increases. 2 stays the same, 3 decreases. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. Go ahead. Yes?
What's the session ID?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No talking. No talking. I'm seeing on my little device here how everybody's thinking. Okay. So, who needs more time? Who needs more time? Okay. So, here's what we're going to do. I want you now to find a neighbor around you who has a different answer. So if you turn to somebody and a person says, I got B and you got B too, you say, thank you very much, and you turn to somebody on the other. If everybody around you has the same answer, you get up and walk around. If I see you just sit there without talking to anybody, I will come and talk to you. Right? Once you've convinced your neighbor, or he or she has convinced you, find somebody else. So go ahead. Go ahead. Rob?
want to change the answer? I want to change the answer? Okay.
Yeah, I want you to answer again. Now look at this. Look at that. You all got fired up. Look at them there. You know, they can't stop. They're still. Hello? Hello? Look at that. Everybody is sitting there. Hello? It doesn't matter. I'm sure that by now many of you have forgotten that I'm not here to talk about thermal expansion. Imagine I'd just given this little lecture about thermal expansion, as I did, and then afterwards I would have said, let's now apply this to rectangular plates with circular holes in it. If we take such a plate and we put it in an oven and heat it up, the diameter of the hole will... I'm going to keep you in suspense a little bit longer. In that case, you know, you would have basically sat there, just written it down. I mean, God, what is less interesting than what happens to circular holes in rectangular metal plates, right? You got all fired up. Now, what I would like you to do is enter what you now believe to be the correct answer. So go ahead, you should have the screen on your question. If you've not changed your mind, you enter the same thing again. If you have changed your mind, you put in what you now believe to be true. Okay, so I'm sure you want to know what the right answer is, but I'm going to keep you in suspense because before I tell you the answer, let's analyze what happened here. I asked you a question, and I had you make a commitment. You had to make the commitment by pressing a button, which you could do on a clicker or learning catalytics. In that respect, learning catalytics is nothing more than a glorified clicker. We'll see how it's much better than a clicker in just a second. After you made the commitment, you had to externalize your answer. You had to turn to a neighbor and say, I chose, what do you have? Well, my choice is because blah, blah, blah. And during this discussion, you turned from the answers to the reasons before the answers. I listened in on a few of those discussions. You talked like a scientist. You were talking about the reasons. So much of our assessment is focused always on the answers. What is really important is the process, not the answer. This actually puts the focus back on the process. And if this were an art history question, it had to do with an interpretation, you'd be talking about the interpretation. So this can go in any type of discipline, right? But most of all, you became emotionally invested in the learning process. If I were to walk away right now, you'd be coming running after me, asking me what the right answer is. Right? Even though under normal circumstances, you wouldn't be that interested by it. Okay, let's see. Have people entered their revised answers? Now, I have some bad news for you. Initially, only 33% of you got it right. I thought I gave a pretty brilliant explanation of why the metals expand. But only 33% of you got it right. What does that tell you? That tells that lecturing has pretty limited effect, right? But as I showed you in that flow diagram, when we're near 30%, there are basically not enough people who know the right answer. So the correct answer, and I'm going to show it on all of your devices here so you can see what the distribution is, but the right answer is number 1, which after discussion 40% got. So there was an improvement, but just not very much here because the initial percentage was low. So 2 things. 1, my lecturing sucks. And you know, no matter what you believed it to be, it was not that effective at teaching you because you basically didn't have any time to assimilate it. You should have done your reading before coming to this session. But secondly, notice the engagement. I can see many of you sit there thinking, it doesn't matter. I'm not here to teach you about thermal expansion. But you know, I don't want you to be in bed tonight thinking, why does that hole get bigger? So let me take a minute, even though it's really a waste of time because I'm here to talk about pedagogy. But imagine you have a jar of jam in the refrigerator. The jar has a metal lid, which consists of a ring and a metal plate. You take the jar out of the refrigerator, you can't open it. What do? You run it under hot water so that the metal ring expands and the hole gets bigger. You say, that's unfair. This is a metal plate. That's a ring. Okay. Imagine we had a metal plate without a hole in it. We take a marker. We draw a circle on the plate. We put the plate in the oven. The plate expands. What happens to the diameter of that circle? Everything gets bigger, so the circle gets bigger too. You say, well, that's unfair. There's no hole. If there was a hole, then the atoms would expand into the hole. Well, and in fact, let me show you the distribution in case you don't have a device in front of you. I didn't show the device, but here is the distribution. This was the before discussion. This was after discussion. Notice that this is the predominant mode of thinking. Now imagine we are the atoms at the edge of the hole. We form a big circle holding hands. Now we step in towards the center of the hole. What just happened to the distance between us? It got smaller. It can't get smaller because, our neighbor is shaking violently, and we are too, right? The only way to make the distance between us larger is to remove some of it, but atoms don't disappear like that, but is to make the circle larger. You won't forget this. Okay, back to peer instruction. And again, I wish I could show you the data, but I want to get, in the last 20 minutes or so, I want to get to sort of learning catalytics and the really exciting things. So I'm not going to show you data, but plenty of people in plenty of fields, from chemistry to physics to you name it, have shown higher learning gains. And what's also really exciting, better retention. That study at Carnegie Mellon showed much better retention after interactive teaching. And not only better retention of the material, better retention of students in the discipline because they get more engaged. And if you're interested, you could watch that YouTube video that I referred to, or if you're a user, join this new social network at peerinstruction.net, where you can find other users of peer instruction in your discipline and hook up with them and share materials. But now I'd like to take this last little bit, and feel free, if you have an obligation, to walk out. I won't be offended, to show you some of the features of learning catalytics that are really exciting. Peer instruction is all about feedback. It's a form of continuous formative assessment, right? No longer is there just a flow of information from me to the students. There's information coming back. I can find out then and there in the classroom what is going on in their minds. I don't have to wait till, the midterm or the end of semester to find out that something is wrong. But much more importantly, it's also feedback to the students, right? Because they get to assess their own knowledge. Take that question that I showed on a little video clip. If you were a student in the 10% who still gets it wrong after the discussion, there's no problem with it because you haven't lost any credit. But you've had a way of assessing your knowledge, and you've sort of, a little bit, red flag has been raised, saying, hey, you better look at this subject some more. So there's continuous formative assessment. But feedback is an important problem. And the feedback to the instructor initially, when I started in 1991, was simply a show of hands. There was no technology. There's a classroom here at Cornell, in the physics department, I don't know if it's still around, where a professor had 3 doorbells, basically, to poll his students in class. That's probably the first occurrence of what we would now call a clicker. Predated peer instruction. He used it only as a polling tool. There was no discussion like I did in my class. In 1993, not knowing about this classroom in Cornell, we, with a grant from the NSF, developed this wired network of calculators, extremely expensive. It was beautiful because I had the students log in just as I had here on Learning Catalytics, and I knew exactly where each student was seated, and so on. It was great, but it was not scalable and very hard to sustain because things would break down constantly. But then a few years later, an alum from the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Harvard, who had a factory in Hong Kong, developed the first infrared clickers. Fast forward 10 years, now there's a zoo of different clickers. There are actually even campuses where they use several different clickers and where students have to buy more than one type to be able to participate in different types of classes. And something interesting happened, namely it all became about the technology, not the pedagogy. Some faculty would come to me and say, hey, I've adopted your clicker technology. And I'd get furious for two reasons. One is, to me, it's the pedagogy that matters, not the technology. Moreover, most people forget about the technology and just use it as a polling tool or an attendance tool, even worse. But the reason that upsets me the most is that I failed to commercialize the clicker and missed the boat on that. And I noticed that while giving workshops on peer instruction, the questions that instructors had are the following. How do I design good questions? What are the type of questions that get students to learn in the classroom? None of the clicker systems come with any questions or any tools for that. How do I optimize the discussion? You talk to a random neighbor, chances are that you are right now sitting next to somebody you know. Well, somebody you know is probably very much like you or in the same department. You're much likely to learn something from somebody you don't know. But we tend, social animals as we are, to shy away from talking to people we don't know. And therefore, the discussions might not be optimized. How do I manage time? When you spend time on questioning, how much time do you give students to think? 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes? How much time do you give them to talk to each other? The clicker systems have a built-in clock, but you basically set it once, 2 minutes, and then it sticks to 2 minutes for the entire session. But some questions take more time, others take less time. None of the systems provide that. That's when the idea came to do Learning Catalytics with two colleagues. One is Gary King, who is a statistician and does statistical analysis of social media. He's my mountain bike buddy. We go mountain biking. When I found out about this company that did statistical analysis of social media, I thought, wow. So you can take free response, not free response, but just open-ended text and do statistical algorithms to get meaningful data. I thought, that's great. If we can do that in education, wow. You may not get exact precision, but you can still get meaningful feedback. Brian Lukoff was a postdoc of mine who got his PhD at Stanford on a thesis where he showed that he could grade drawn functions by computer better than a human can. So you would give a student a function, have the student draw it, and then give it to a number of teachers to say, does this drawn function adequately represent this function, yes or no? And he would do the same thing to a computer algorithm that he developed. And I thought, wow, that's another piece of the puzzle. Now we can take graphical input and judge that. So that gave rise, and we thought we're going to use intelligent algorithms and data analytics to improve the questionings, to manage the discussions, and to facilitate the time flow. I'm only going to be able to show you the first one, improving the questioning. Most clicker systems, in fact all of them actually, are limited to multiple choice questions. And most instructors get this bad feeling when you talk about multiple choice questions for a good reason. Namely, when we develop multiple choice question, we suffer from the curse of knowledge, right? You put the question, you can put down the right answer, but what are plausible wrong choices? Your mind doesn't work that way anymore. And that's why most multiple choice questions are not very good, because they don't address the misconceptions or the ideas that the students have. And therefore, many students can develop elimination techniques to answer multiple choice questions, and you don't actually have an appropriate assessment. So we decided to develop an extensible plugin architecture that would permit us to do many different types of questions, and I'm going to show you a few of them. So Here are the different types that we had a while back. We have many more. We have 16 in total now. But let's start with the direction question. Here is, and if you haven't set up yet and you still want to participate, go to learningcatalytics.com and create a free student account with sign-up code DEMO and then join session 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I hope most of you have already done that. This here, this picture here, which should be on your screen now, shows a picture of Oahu taken from the space shuttle. It's not very sharp. And, you can see Waikiki here, and you can see Waikiki here, Diamond Head. Pearl Harbor is right here. If you look, you can see that the vegetation is dry on one side, wet on the other. You can see where clouds form. This picture contains several clues about the prevailing wind directions in the Pacific. I want you to take your finger and draw, or if you have a trackpad, use a trackpad to draw an arrow indicating what you think, based on the clues in this picture, is the prevailing wind direction in Oahu. So draw an arrow and then hit submit. Go ahead. And if you've answered and you want to see what I see on my display here, raise your hand and I'll come and show you my iPad. Yeah? Okay, don't forget to hit the submit button. Now notice, I could have made this into a multiple choice question and drawn some arrows, but it would not have allowed me to let you use your imagination and your creativity to decide what the right answer is in your opinion. Okay, so we pretty much cover all 360 degrees. So I guess that when I don't give a lecture at all, we get slightly better results. 34% is correct rather than 33. It's pretty good. I'm going to show you what my display shows. That will also give away what the right answer is, but here we are. And you can see in the on this side all of the arrows that have been drawn and marked in green the ones that are correct. I'm going to actually stop delivery and display it on your device so you can see it. So on your screen you can now see all the arrows that have been drawn. I use this in my own class. And I don't teach earth sciences, I teach physics. Here's an example for it. So in case you couldn't see it because you didn't have a device, you would have seen this little picture. You would have drawn an arrow, which would have shown up in blue. And then I see the picture with all of the arrows. This was in a conference where there were several hundred people. Here's a question that I use in my class. These are two mirrors. It's called a corner cube. The two mirrors are at 90 degrees, and there's an incoming ray of light. So it will bounce off that first mirror, then bounce off the other mirror. In which direction does the ray return? Well, it used to be a multiple choice question when we had clickers. And I had drawn some random directions because I didn't know. I knew the correct direction, which is straight back. But I didn't know what kind of misconceptions the students had. With Learning Catalytics, I was able to find out, right? So you put the question on the student's screen, they draw an arrow, and then I can see what the distribution is. About 58% got it correct the first time, but you can see from the arrows that are drawn that many students believe the light will come down at an angle. I don't know why, but that's one common misconception. I could, of course, investigate one. Had I not drawn in my multiple choice question an arrow that would be in that angle, the students would not have selected it, which shows the weakness of multiple choice questions. I have the students talk to each other, and then it improves, and now 73% have it correct after discussion. So, very different type of question where you can still judge right and wrong. Let's do a very different type of question in a very different field. We're going to go to art history now. Right? I'm going to show you a painting by Sassetta from the early Renaissance that shows 4 saints, and then Mary and the baby Jesus. And I want you to identify who St. John the Baptist is in that painting. So indicate who you think is St. John the Baptist, and then hit submit. Okay, I'll put it on the screen here, and I'll enlarge it. Oops, this is not the one I want to show. Here we go. There. Some people are poking fun here and selecting the Virgin Mary. Come on! St. John the Baptist, male. And no, it's not the baby Jesus either. I mean, I took a very simple example because I understand many of you there might be cultural differences and there might also be differences in interest, but you can imagine how in a teaching of art history you could do it. I have a person at Harvard who uses this in her teaching of art history, and then she has people indicate where the vanishing point is, right? So you have to understand perspective and the rendering of perspective, or, you know, interpretation of different scenes and mythological representations. So let me show on your screen now what people selected. There it is. Let me zoom out here so you can also see it on this screen. There are the results. We got 40% correct. The second person from the right. No, I'm not going to explain to you why. This is unimportant. I just wanted to show you. And we're not using it right now in a pedagogical manner, right? I'm not doing peer instruction. I'm just demonstrating the different response modalities of this software. You can also use it to teach, I'm jumping from one subject to another, to teach mathematics, because it has a complete mathematical engine on the back end. Now, I realize that not everybody here is a scientist, and there's a broad range of interests, so I'm going to give you a really simple algebra problem to solve, and this is it. Oops, I got to zoom out here. If 2x minus y equals 4, what is x? And I want you to answer that by entering it in your device. Now, here's the thing. There are many equivalent, correct ways of representing the answer. Right? For example, say that a plus b would be the right answer. B plus a would also be correct. Or 2a plus 2b in parentheses divided by 2 would also be correct. I challenge you to test my system by entering a mathematically correct but rather weird expression, and you'll see that it will count it correctly. So go ahead, enter your answers. And already we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different ways of correctly expressing the answer. Be sure to answer with the y and the x in lowercase, because lower and uppercase are two different things. Okay, another few seconds. And I'm only going to be able to show you a few more types. There are really many types that I find very exciting, like data collection. You could do statistics and get data and show Gaussian distributions and so on. And I'll get all of those data on the spot. I can't do it here. Let me show you what people have come up with. I'm going to project it on the screen in a second, but I'm also going to show it on your device. So here are the different, which question is this for? Here are the different answers. The green ones are all correct. I'm going to blow this up so you can read it. So 4 plus y divided by 2, or 4 divided by 2 plus y divided by 2, or 2 plus 0.5y, or 2 plus y divided by 2, all equivalent. They all mean mathematically the same thing, right? If you did this just with a simple text recognition algorithm, it wouldn't work. You have to actually interpret the mathematics. And it will do that. It will do that with trigonometric functions, with things that are much more complicated than what I showed here. Great in physics and mathematics and anything that has equations in chemistry and so on, because you can ask students to enter equations. Here are the incorrect expressions at the bottom. Okay, another one is sketch. You can ask the students, say this to the students here, this is the logarithm of x. Sketch me the derivative of this logarithm. Right, one way that I would have done this with clickers would have been to draw a couple of potential derivatives which have come up in my mind and ask students to select the correct one. But whether or not this question works well depends on my imagination in drawing the incorrect versions of the logarithm. Here, you just put it on the screen. The student draws the derivative, and then as an instructor, you see all of the derivatives. Oh, Sarah drew this, Paul drew that. And you can see at once the type of misconceptions that the students have. Right now, we don't automatically score the function. This is something that will come, but has not yet been in there. But let's do a graphical question. Here's one. No, this is a data collection question, not the one I want to do. Here we go. Sarah rides her bike to a friend's house, which is 0.5 miles from home. A straight road along which she rides at a steady speed leads from her home to her friend. The trip takes 5 minutes. She stays at her friend's house for 5 minutes, then walks back home at half the speed she had on her bike. Sketch her displacement from home as a function of time on the graph below. So just use your finger or your trackpad to draw her trip from home. And if you can't read it, there's the question. And if somebody has answered and wants to see what I see on my iPad, which I use to control the class, raise your hand, I'll show you. And I'm sorry for making you work on a Wednesday afternoon here. You're doing quite well. I was waiting for that. I'm going to see who is responsible for this. You know, sometimes people draw bikes. This person tried to sketch a hole. So let me show you what I see here. I can actually see the individual graphs. Jessica, you're poking fun at me here, huh? I don't know who Jessica is, but I can probably find out. Jessica wrote a whole story here on her device. But let me show you, including Jessica's scribbles, the whole. Oh no, that's not what I want. I want this. There we go. I can overlay all of the graphs, and what it does is actually shows that most people have the correct answer, which is, 5 minutes, which is this, to get half a mile away, then 5 minutes there, then back more slowly. Some people had it at half the distance, and other people forgot about the 5 minutes at the friend's house. So by overlaying it, you can see sort of where the answers cluster. And Jessica, I'm sorry, but I can't read anymore what message you scribbled to me there. Okay. So let's see. There's another one where we can have students look at a literary passage and ask them to highlight the part of that passage that they think does something or tells something or is most vivid and so on. And everybody gets that literary passage on their screen, and then you highlight with your finger, and I get a heat map showing the most chosen passages, the ones that are less, and so on. So you can basically see the sentences become brighter, but I'm afraid I don't have time to do that. Instead, I want to do something else that is, I find personally really exciting, and that's the following. I hope that you all were able to choose your seat if you were not able to choose your seat, hit the little link that says change my seat, and then display the seat map and choose your seat from the map that you see. Okay? If you've done that already, no need to do it again, but if you've not done that, please do it now. So the thing that I did not get to show you is the data analytics behind learning catalytics, right? The questions reside in the cloud, which means that any question I write is accessible to other instructors. They get tagged. If you see a question you like but you want to improve on it, you can use a wiki-like interface to improve it. You can also see what the historical data are. So if you type in, let's say, I can't edit the question while we're doing it. I can't edit this session while we're doing it, unfortunately, so I can't demo that. But if I were to add a new question, I could search the database, type in a word, neuron, let's say, see all the questions that biologists have asked about neurons with the system. If I like one, but I think I can improve on it, I can also see the data that were obtained, anonymized, of course, that were obtained by this question. So there's a lot of data analytics on the background, which I cannot, unfortunately, show. I want to show another important thing, which is this human interaction, which is so important. Here's a question that I asked in my classroom, and after we started using this, we thought it would be nice to see not only a bar chart, but to also see what the geographical distribution is. So I made this little button so you can actually see, and I cannot show this to you for privacy reasons because this is my actual class at Harvard, but if you hover the cursor over the seats, it shows the student's name, and if the student has linked his or her Facebook profile, the profile picture. So you can actually use this to get to know your students. This is the distribution before. So now I get not just a bar chart, I get a geographical distribution of answer. And this is after discussion. And notice that the wrong answers tend to cluster, right? There are a lot of groups that form that are just not optimum. So that's when I thought, what we really need to do is we need to let the system manage the pairing. Let the system decide who gets paired to who, right? And I want to try that with you right now. So I'm counting on you having entered your seat. Here we go. This is the question. A meteorologist predicts a 40% chance of rain in London. Did I deliver the question? Do you have it on your screen? Yes. Yeah. Okay, why is it not showing here? Okay, I'm not going to show it here, so it's on your screen. A meteorologist predicts a 40% chance of rain in London and 70% chance in Chicago. This is actually a crazy question. It always rains in London. What is the most likely outcome? A, it rains only in London. B, it rains only in Chicago. C, it rains in London and in Chicago. D, it rains in London or Chicago. So no talking to each other now. Now we do peer instruction, okay? Shh. No talking. Shh. Oh, you have only one device. Okay. If you don't have a device, I need to show you the question. This is annoying. Okay, I cannot show you the question, unfortunately. Okay, so please enter an answer. If you're not sure of what the answer is, then just make a guess, but enter something. I'm going to wait another 20 seconds. 15. 10. If you've already entered the answer, ask yourself, how am I going to convince the person next to me that I am right? 5. If by now you have not answered the answer, just make it a game. But you have to press a button. Just make it a random choice, okay? Make it a game. There's no credit for it. It won't be on the final exam. Don't worry. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to resend the question. And what will happen is that now on your device, it will give you the name of one or two other people sitting around you with whom you should discuss this question. So go ahead, talk to each other.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.